Welcome to Defender Fridays, the weekly rendezvous with the forefront of information security. I love the way that this was written. This is absolutely amazing. I'm here to guide you through these chats. My name is Matt. I'm here at LimaCharlie. We're joined by some wonderful, wonderful, amazing folks from all across the industry. Folks at LimaCharlie, not at LimaCharlie. There's lots of cool people on here, and it's great to have everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. Quick note, the chat is open. You should all be able to chat with each other. I love the hellos, the holas. Glad to see everyone's doing well, but we have a wonderful first-time guest planned for you today. Each week, we bring on a different guest to talk about some really cool insights and topics and things like that. And this week, we've got Ken, straight out of the LimaCharlie sales engineering team. Ken, what's going on, sir?
Hey, Matt.
What's happening? Right? I can hear you, and you also get the award for Ken. Tell me a little bit about what the heck is going on in your background today.
Well, yeah, I hate music, as you can see. Yeah, I have a few guitars. My wife makes me keep all my toys in my room here. So I've got quite a few guitars and some synthesizers and things. So I've been playing music since I was 12. So yeah, you got to have hobbies.
Love it. There we go. Ken, it's great to have you, man. Thank you so much for being here. Can you give us a quick background? There's lots of folks who don't know you, but need to know you. And I don't want you to spend like 25 minutes on the background, maybe like a minute, but tell us a little bit about Ken Westin and who he is and what he's done, because I know a lot about your pedigree, but there's some folks here who don't. And
sure. Yeah,
Ben,
so,
that was clever.
My name's Ken Westin. So I've been involved in security for probably like last 15 years or so. I've been in tech before that. I was a web developer, and then got into security, got really interested in USB-based Trojans, had a startup where I actually was using some of that tech to track stolen devices. Ended up getting involved in some interesting investigations on unveiling organized crime groups and things like that. Really enjoyed doing particularly OSINT research work. Spent some time at Splunk, helping with threat hunting programs. Worked at Elastic for a number of years as well. And now I'm at LimaCharlie. Super excited to be here.
We did ask Ken to join us today, and he actually came to the table with some really interesting topic. Ken, I think you want to talk today a little bit about ransomware and how you and I have made a ton of money deploying it in sorry, wrong script. I need to go back and check. No. You ransomware and the business behind ransomware, I think was the topic, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I worked for several companies, and ransomware has always come up as a key topic. And one thing I like to try to understand is, not just the technical aspects of it, but what are the motivations behind it. And it's really interesting with ransomware in particular when you approach it as a business, because yes, I think especially with like the Conti leaks that we saw, it really unveiled a lot of the operations, and it really mimicked a lot of what we saw with traditional companies, right? In many respects, ransomware is a black mirror, and they function like a startup. Like if you look at Conti, they had like over 87 employees. We had the people that were very specialized in their operations. They also had an interesting underlying economy too, where a lot of things like initial access can be purchased. A lot of the spamming or the phishing stuff was outsourced as well. So there's this sort of underlying economy of partners and this whole ecosystem that I think is fascinating. And we talk a lot about the technical aspects. I've even run demos and things to show how ransomware operations work. But it really kind of resonated, I think, with business leaders when I started comparing it to the traditional business that they're used to. I started explaining ransomware in a language that they understood, and I think it comes across a lot better, especially when you think about it more as a financial crime than just a computer crime.
Didn't Conti also have like one of the world's best organized instances of Jira that they were using for ticket track? Was that them? I forget which group it was. Was it Conti?
Yeah, they also had EDR tools.
That's right.
They actually bought I won't say which one, but they bought several of them, and they were testing their technology against it, right? So they probably had better QA than some of the EDR vendors out there.
That doesn't surprise me. They also probably had better network diagrams than 99% of their victims as well. Just going to throw that one out there.
Fundamentally,
it's funny.
EDR invasion, whoever moves last wins. So if you know exactly what you're up against, you'll be just fine.
I like that. Ken, you brought up an interesting point. I'm going to drill down into further with you about talking to business leaders about this and that kind of stuff. So I not to like quote myself, I want to quote you, but I'm going to paraphrase something that you said into something that I've said before, which is if you want to like understand who like why threat actors do what they do, just understand that they're revenue generators, right? And understand that when you kick an adversary out of an environment, obviously a non-scoped, non-red team environment, one that's in there illegally, you're also kicking out a revenue stream. How hard would you fight to get back a revenue stream that made a ton of money? And I feel like that's a really good way to just kind of synthesize that whole, like, you're fighting a business. And I'm curious how has this understanding kind of helped you with that executive side discussion?
Well, I think ransomware doesn't magically appear. It's not like, maybe some other things we've seen that, someone downloads something bad, because they're downloading a pirated version of software or something like that. But there's a lot of failures that have to happen in order for a ransomware to actually get triggered. I experimented with this. I had this whole ransomware range that I'd set up when I was at a prior employer. And, it was really freaking hard to actually set an environment up that was vulnerable to ransomware. All the things I had to disable, and like in Defender, I had to disable all these different things that were on my default that, would have caught the ransomware that I was running. But, once I was able to get all that, then I could actually show it. But I just made me realize like how many points of failure there actually has to be. And there's a lot that can be done, even beforehand, like not even with just EDR, but just, basic best practices for managing identities, things like that. OSINT work too. Like a lot of people don't realize that, if I want to find who the administrator is for a particular system, I can go on LinkedIn and they're bragging about it. Right. And I can use that as a sort of intelligence for what I'm going to run into in that environment. And, if I'm a threat actor, I can, deploy something before they even realize it. So I think that kind of helps is like, look, I explain kind of like from a kill chain mindset, like here's all these different things that would have to happen for ransomware to get executed. So, think about that from a business perspective as well. Like, they're trying to gather intelligence and information about you. How can you maybe mask or hide some of that? All the way into the, how they're handling backups and things like that too. And I think ransomware is becoming much harder now for the ransomware operators to make money. And I think they're getting more desperate. So that's something I think we also need to be aware of.
How does that change their tactics? Do you think they get more like, they get a little more cavalier, a little more careless with stuff, or does it actually does it make them change their targets?
Well, I think they've changed their target quite a bit. They've stopped going for the whales and the big companies, and they're going after sort of smaller companies. They themselves have their own affiliates who are also targeting small to medium-sized businesses. They're much more likely to pay. Some other ones, they may have to contact the legal department, whereas a small business, hey, just to get this up and running, I'll pay maybe a smaller amount, big company, but hey, that my operations are going to be come back into full swing, because some of the businesses can't handle it if their systems go down. Like that's it, going out of business.
Does that mean that the ransomware groups are more likely to be more aggressive in pursuing payment? Like if it's a target-rich environment, if they fight back, if they seem to recover data on their own, you shrug and move on to the next target. If you don't exist in a target-rich universe, you want to maximize the percentage of payout, so you're willing to fight more for each victim. Is that what you're seeing as a trend, essentially?
Yeah, well, there's also double extortion, right? So not only are they encrypting the data, but they're also saying if you don't pay it, then we're going to release this data, or they'll try to find something embarrassing, right? And I would even
get the impression, and essentially the major ransomware groups are always doing double extortion at this point, or very nearly always. And now it's like triple and quadruple extortion that is less common but still happens.
Yeah, and even if you pay it, odds are that data still is being compromised in some fashion. Like a lot of these ransomware groups are operating in Russia. That information isn't being shared with intelligence services. I don't think so.
Yeah, I've always I think another trend that's worth, and just to be clear for everyone, like the genesis of this question with Ken was like, how do we kind of talk to business leaders about this, right? Not folks in the trenches who are over there like, wow, it's the most amazing piece of malware I've ever seen. I find that the other discussion to have is that as threat actors, they're getting much smarter. I use this example a lot. If anyone's heard me say this before, I apologize, but go and Google and look up when the Fort Lauderdale school system got ransomed. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this one or not, but the Fort Lauderdale school system got ransomed, and the ransomware threat actors came back, and I think they demanded like $40 million or whatever. On the surface, if you hear that, and you're like a school district paying a ransom of 40 million, you must be out of your mind. The threat actors came back and were like, yeah, well, we looked over your financials and it's 1% of your budget. So we're familiar with how much money you have and don't have. And it's like, it's a tough negotiation stance to come to the table with. It's not just some random arbitrary number. It's actually like threat actors who went, did business analysts. And then also you got to think too, right? Like any negotiation, they start high. But when you come in with that financial precursor of like, no, we've looked at your budget. Like we have an idea of where you're at budget wise. So we'll start here, but be aware that we know your finances. And I just think I'm not sure what class of extortion that falls into, but I do find it to be an interesting like change in perhaps TTPs from a post-exploit, post-exfil negotiation status. I don't even know if negotiation is on the MITRE attack matrix. Maybe it should be, but nonetheless, we can't all just read Chris Voss and be experts at it. But I'll throw out as well that from an extortion perspective, another thing to keep in mind too is that there's another element of extortion, which is not just I'll release your data or I'll embarrass your data, but it's also I'll notify the regulatory bodies that this has happened. And I mean, like, Ken, what does this do if I'm a legal department, right? And I've got this company that I'm representing or I'm internal counsel, and not only did we have all these failures, but like they're threatening disclosure and stuff like that. And I feel like I've kind of lost control of the narrative. Is that not like a new style of threat actor? I don't know. Have we seen this before?
Well, it's sort of like now they have their own legal departments, right?
Yeah, right.
They know more about the compliance in the industry than maybe we do, right? So that's that just it's kind of amazing. And sometimes I kind of shake my head, like, yeah, we get frustrated with it, but they're super smart. You kind of see some sort of a hack or something like that, and you sort of have respect for it. You may not trust their ethics and things like that, but man, sometimes you just kind of shake your head and it's like, I never even thought of that. That's awesome.
So Chris is on here, Christopher Lufton. Chris knows that whenever we record episodes of Cybersecurity Defenders podcast, I'm always very careful to say I don't like to give threat actors compliments. I don't like to boost up their ego or anything, but man, there has been some attacks and some malware and even some shell scripts where you're just like, oh, that's sweet. I didn't know you could do that on a command line. Here we go. And then I take it and it becomes part of my MO. And not the adversarial, like breaking and entering part, but more of like I didn't know you could bend the commands that way kind of thing. But yeah, we never want to get into that type of situation, right? Where we're complimenting threat actors, but I know exactly what you mean by that one too. I'm curious, like that was a little bit of a digression on the business leader side. How is it for analysts to respond to this now? Because here's the thing. I feel like if you catch an attack somewhere in the attack chain prior to data encryption and exfiltration, you might have a fighting chance. But like, what do you think that does to a SOC who's like, hey, I just received a notification of a ransom note on my desktop. What do I do? Right? Because you've got to just see the entire attack chain just flood in front of your eyes and you're like, yeah, all that happened. And I think you talked about like multiple failure points prior to getting to that. Again, what do you think, like how do we shore up? How do we get ahead of that type of thing happening? Not a prescription necessarily that's going to solve everyone's thing, but what are some like either mitigation, remediative, risk averse, or detection based methods that you've seen people do to try and get ahead of this issue?
Well, I think a lot of things. Well, I think visibility is key. I think that's one thing. When this kind of thing happens, that's not a good time to find out that you don't have full visibility into your environment. I think that probably scares the crap out of a lot of people. Like maybe you have visibility on your endpoints, but adversaries, they can pivot into cloud infrastructure. I've seen that with some breaches where, they clean it up on the network, but then the attacker pivoted into a cloud and has been hiding there for a while, and then was able to do some additional damage and data exfiltration. So I think, again, that visibility, not just of your traditional endpoints, but also your cloud infrastructure and things like that. We're also seeing more attacks that are targeting like shifting left, like getting more into like the developer platforms, targeting things like GitHub and code repositories, looking for secrets, things like that. And those are data sources that a lot of times people aren't bringing in to their SIEM. And there's a lot of really valuable data in there that could identify when there's something that's going wrong. And maybe it's a different team that's working on it, right? So I guess having that full visibility of everything that's going on in your environment as much as possible, I think that's critically important. There's also newer approaches now. There's companies like Halcyon that I know that are doing some really interesting things around ransomware, where they can even detect the key when it's going. So then they can grab that key and then quickly decrypt the data. There's also sort of alliances now too with some of the cyber insurance companies too that are making more requirements around controls that are in place. I think that's helpful too. But I mean, the analysts, they have a little bit more tooling available to them, but I think the visibility is still going to be critically important. I think because adversaries are going to change their tactics and their techniques. So things that we're able to detect before, they're going to try to find ways of bypassing that.
Yeah, no, I think that's some really solid advice for like any org that's out there. And I think there's a really good kind of benchmark or position that needs to be taken at that, like, what can we see? And this road to me often leads down the aspect of like security testing, whether it's through a red team or through a purple team or just automated testing or open source tools like OpenBAS, Atomic Red Team or something like that, right? Of just like have a starting point where you can just start to assess what you can actually see. And I'm very much of the same mindset that you're at. And I've said this before as well to folks, where I say, like, the ones and zeros of the universe have never aligned that Mimikatz just appears, right? It's never happened that way, at least in the history of computing. I can say that with a level of certainty. So if ones and zeros don't align magically, then they had to have been placed there. Then there's like footsteps and stuff to be tracked, right? And things like that. So start to work on tracking and seeing those. And yeah, I know it's really easy to sit here and be like, yeah, test your controls. But I feel like there's so many ways to do that now. There's so many things that you can do to actually test your visibility and test your controls that there's an option for everyone. You can go and book a super expensive, multifaceted, multi-month purple team and have people on site doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And then you can just go and get some scripts and just run them and be like, did I see that? And then I'll go even simpler, right? Go to a terminal, open cmd.exe, and then ask your SOC to say, where did I open cmd.exe? And if you can't, it's not that it's a bad thing. It's that you know what you need to work on next. You know what you need to work on next. And then, yeah, Jeff's throwing in, like, there's also other active defense and active measures that we can utilize where you can integrate things such as canary tokens. Again, free for some versions of them, where you can get those tripwires that are like, something's wrong, something's not right here. You know what I mean? So I feel like there's a lot of like education and things that can be done to make this a little bit easier. But now, Ken, I think you've hit upon a really good topic here too. If I can bring it back a little bit to more of the business side of things, why do you think this happened? I just want to get your opinion. I'm always curious because it's really easy to look at like an APT group and be like, well, obviously they're organized, they're state nexus, they're military intelligence origin, right? There's often there's often some sort of a structure that it was formed out of. Even if you have competing intelligence teams, there's still a structure of that like military thing behind it, right? Did a bunch of ransomware actors sit around in Eastern Europe or Russia one day and were like, guys, we're pretty disorganized. What if we Captain Planeted our forces here and we combine this to make something better? I don't know. What are your thoughts, man? Why do you think these threat actors, was it money driven? We can make more money if we work together, or I want to get your opinion here.
Yeah, I think, well, I actually looked at like the IC3 ransomware complaints, and it was interesting. The victim count went up until about 2016, but you remember the ransomware strains then were targeting individuals. So imagine that, like, I
remember those sweet days, dude. You just told people, like, just back up your stuff and you'd be done.
Yeah, like and then your mom gets hit with it, and then the ransomware operator has to explain how to get Bitcoin, right? And I think they're here to make money. Now it's costing them time, right? Sure, they maybe get $2,000, but it took them 20 hours, right? And that's not very economical. But I think they realize that, hey, the real money is actually targeting businesses and organizations. And I think in order for us to do that, we need to mimic that sort of same behavior. And that's where you start to see the strain starting to target more businesses and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. How about the ransomware as a service model? Is that like, so here, let me like break this down, right? For anyone who has not spent a lot of time going through this, and I'm assuming everyone's got some sort of exposure to it and that kind of stuff, but like when Ken says it's a business, This isn't just like, oh, they're organized and they have like a support department and like they, have MDM profiles and stuff like that. Like there are facets and parts of the supply chain of this business. And then there are people who, just like any company in the world or any industry in the world, also figured out like the niche cracks in the business where they could like, hey, I can make some money doing that too. It's like, I'm not good at deploying malware. I'm really good at writing phishing emails. I'm going to sell that. I'm going to be an initial access broker and I'm just going to get a foothold and then pass that thing off. Right. And then someone else is like, I'm awful at dealing with people, but I can handle code like no one else is. I'm going to write some malware and just sell the malware off and stuff. And I feel like there's all these little pieces that have come out of it. And it is such a like industry. It's a real industry, right? There's little bits and pieces. And I think that can create a little bit of a formidable presence for some folks when they think about and read about it as you get further and further down the line. And you're like, man, this is like more organized than the mafia was. And it's like, no, they're just as organized as the mafia was because they have every line down there. But Ken, are there any other, like, I'm going to say attack objectives, maybe for lack of a better term, that are this organized? I don't know. Anything you've seen where you're just like, man, feels like ransomware?
Well, I have concerns about like the sextortion stuff that's actually turned into a profitable business, and that's targeting kids. And like that's kind of outside of the realm of business, but it's something I actually helped a friend with that situation, and it was such a bad situation that kids are like actually killing themselves over this because of the shame and things like that. They're going more with it, and I know a big ring got broken up around that, but this was kind of the same thing, right? If they want to make money and then people start finding ways of making money and there's no risk, then they're usually likely to go after it because a lot of these folks operate in countries that there is no, extradition treaty with the US, right? So, but that kind of stuff, like I think they're becoming much more brazen. I think the ethics are going out the window, and greed takes over, and I think that's a big concern for us all.
As we exist in a world with more and more breach data about more and more higher percentage of the world at this point, like, all AT&T customers, for example, and name, address, social security number, multiple records per person, then like there's some relatively easy ways to extort money from every single one of those targets, which is a little scary. It's the equivalent of credential stuffing, but for individuals at this point. Just plug in some credentials to your pipeline and watch the dollars fly in. The biggest issue to scale is just like the customer support.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The other one I was going to throw in there is and it's funny because I think as cybersecurity people, we tend to get, apologies on that term, but you all fit under that umbrella. I think as cyber folks, right? It's a little more colloquial. It's really easy to get wrapped up in the technical side of it. But when you realize that aside from ransomware, one of the most best organized and profitable industries out there is like romance and elderly scams and that kind of stuff. And you realize like, oh, wait a second. It's not the super advanced 0-day industry that is like the most amazing thing here. It's literally people conning other humans via dating sites. Business email compromise for me will always enter this discussion as well, because if you ever read the IC3 report, it is the lion's share of money stolen. But like, it is just crazy to me to think about how organized some of these groups get. And like, Ken, I'm happy you brought this up to light as like ransomware as a business, because it also opens this other discussion of like, well, since we're talking about organized maliciousness, right? Let's with a cyber element to it, let's go take a look at what some of these other scams are doing, because these guys are raking in tons of money. And I'm going to drop a link unless someone beats me to it, to the IC3 report, which is an annual report I would highly recommend checking out if you're in this space, because it is such a really, really good reference about just how much money. Oh, look at this guy. Amazing. But like, there's a whole report. It is 21 pages long on elder fraud. And like you might think like, oh yeah, it's always like, I don't want to say it's a joke, but it's kind of like a passing discussion of like, oh yeah, someone's grandma, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, whether it happened to you or not, folks, like, here we go. $3.4 billion last year, $3.4 billion last year, in elder fraud. So just crazy numbers, crazy statistics, and like another side of cybersecurity to get familiar with as well. Ken, we've got a little over a minute left. I want to give you that minute to tell, like, what are you going to be up to next? Someone already dropped your upcoming conference talk, so I'll let you speak about that. But where can folks learn more about Ken?
Yeah, I'll be at GurCon next week in Grand
Right, right, right.
Rapids. Giving a
With the
talk.
raptor, with the velociraptor dinosaur or whatever it is.
Yeah. It's a great conference. It's like DEF CON in the Midwest. It's great. I'll be there. It's a short talk, just a half hour talk. I'll be talking about this, providing some examples and some other resources as well. So if you're going to be there, stop by. There's going to be a happy hour and things. So hope to see you all there.
I'm going to drop 2 mentions. Number one, if you've never been to GurCon and you have an opportunity to go, Grand Rapids, Michigan is actually a surprisingly beautiful, amazing place. I don't say that with any negative assumptions. It was just, I didn't expect it. It's actually really cool. And then the last thing I'll mention, thank you, Charlton, for dropping the link in there, is if you're in the DC area or want to join us in the DC area in the first week of October, LimaCharlie's Mission Control Conference will also be happening in right across the Potomac in Arlington, I believe. I never know which neighborhood it is, but nonetheless, Arlington it is. Cool. With that said, everyone, we are at the top of the hour. Another awesome episode of Defender Fridays in the books. What a wonderful day it's been. Thank you all so much for joining. Ken, thank you for jumping in and walking us through this big, scary business known as ransomware, because I got to tell you, man, the more we talk about it, the less scary it is, and hopefully the easier it is for folks to defend against it too. So everyone, thank you. Have a great weekend. And if I don't see you between now and then, I'll see you same thing, same place, same time next week. Take care. See y'all later.